In this video, the middle-aged nerds discuss spoilers from books they read decades ago. Do you really need a spoiler alert? Do you really?
Hi, I'm Bill, also known as Matt Stagger.
And I'm the Geeky Hippie. Welcome back to Non-Terrestrial Half-Life, the YouTube channel that rereads books from our youth and sees if they still hold up. This week, we've got two guests, special guests with us. Below me, we've got our friend Angela from Do Unicorns Read on YouTube. Great channel. How you doing today, Angela?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really very looking forward to talking to all of you.
Definitely. And next to her, we have Mitch. If you've been watching What the Adaptation, when we discussed season 3 of The Expanse, you would know Mitch. He was there with us the whole season. How you doing, Mitch? Good to have you back.
I'm doing just fine. Thanks for having me.
Definitely.
Good to see you both, and thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. Talking one of my favorite series, Dune.
If you guys can't tell, sandworms. So,
Fear's the Mind Killer.
yep. One of the seminal classics of science fiction, you could easily say, probably the most influential science fiction book I can think of. Probably more influential than anything H.G. Wells wrote, I would say. Maybe. That might
I'd say
be.
Time Machine comes close. I
Yeah.
mean, that really, historically,
Yeah.
that hits pretty hard.
So
Probably without the time machine, no Dune.
Yeah, I can agree.
right.
The parallels there.
So we always like to start off on this channel when we have new guests, finding out what got you guys into reading. When did you first discover you love books, and what book or books led to that? We'll start with you, Mitch.
I actually got started really young with the Hardy Boys, and my sisters had the Nancy Drew series, and between the three of us, we just read the crap out of them. And then there was a bodega near where I lived in New York at the time that had the sci-fi magazines that were available. So I started picking those up once I got my paper route and I had disposable cash. I used to buy those once a month and pour over the short stories.
That'll do it.
Awesome.
Angela?
Well, I encountered, very early, let's say age 4 or 5, of course, Grimm's fairy tales that I got read to by either my parents or by my grandmother. From my grandmother, I also got a lot of more oral stories. I remember one from way back, which had a family of rabbits involved in it. So already a little bit of a fantasy topic. When I was able to read myself, the very first book that I remember reading myself was by the German author Kästner, Pünktchen und Anton. So Pünktchen, so Dot and Anton. Dot is a little girl and Anton is a boy, and they're in Berlin and they form a friendship. That's the very first book I remember really reading. I also was big into the Pippi Longstocking stories and books. So again, more into the fantasy area. The first, let's say, more adult fantasy that I picked up, I was maybe 13, 14, Lord of the Rings, because a guy in my class in school read it and was totally into it. And I was like, so what's that? What's it about? And I got it then from the local library. So my first read then, of course, was still in German, so I didn't have enough English to read it. So that is how I got into reading and into fantasy then.
Okay. When did you finally read Lord of the Rings in English?
Oh, when I had started university, so when I was maybe 18, 19, and felt confident enough that I would make it through a fantasy book without having to look in the dictionary every second word or something like that. So yeah.
I can imagine. Were there major differences you found, sort of culturally, once you understood English better from a German version from the English one?
They, for example, Germanized the names as well in the German version. at least in the translation I read. I think there's a different translation out by now as well. I don't even know if that early translation that I read is still around. But yeah, so there were some differences. But I think overall, I didn't have the feeling I'm reading a totally different book now or something like that. So no.
You've read it more in which language would you say you've read it more in?
In English.
Okay.
So as soon as I've read it in English once, I did all my rereads in English.
Okay.
Then, yeah.
Oh.
And unlike some of you who started with The Hobbit and then Lord of the Rings, I did it the other way around. So I read the Lord of the Rings first, and then The Hobbit, and then the Silmarillion. But again, the Silmarillion only when I was already in university and could read it in English.
It's not easy. Silmarillion
no,
is
it's
so
not
easy.
Oh, no, it's not. No,
I've
no,
never
no
finished
matter
it.
what language, I think it's so not easy.
And I haven't read it in 20 some odd years, and I just remember how hard it was to get through.
I never finished it.
Yeah. We're going to try not to talk about the movies. I mean, we can bring the movies up, but I want us to focus on the book for this. With the recent movie out, it's hard not to have that in your head. At least I'm having a hard time keeping it out of my head. So do you remember when you first read Dune? It's Bill?
100%. I was 15. And my local librarian actually, library was sort of a right down the street from my house.
Okay.
And that was my safe place, sort of growing up. It wasn't the best neighborhood, but the library was my place I could go and it's where I met most of my friends. But I read a lot, and the librarian was, I think you might like this. And she slid it across the table to me, and it was this old beat up paperback. I'm like, Dune. I'm like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And boy, did it change my whole sort of mindset. And I think I read it at least 4 times before I had to turn the book back in.
Nice. I don't blame you, man. It's easy to start right back in. Angela, how about you?
I discovered Dune when I was almost 20, so again in university, because I enrolled in a course about, they couldn't or didn't want to call it fantasy literature, so it was called Utopias and Psychology, but it basically was fantasy literature. So we were reading Le Guin, for example, The Dispossessed, and things like that. No, so but Dune wasn't part of the reading list. But that summer I discovered a whole lot of, let's say, books from that era, no? So the 60s, 70s, that type of fantasy. And one of those books was Dune, yeah. And blew me away. I was like, wow, this is a great book. So yeah. And I didn't reread it at all. I only read it now just a couple of months ago in preparation for this talk, actually, more so. But I thought I promised my viewers a read along, and I gave them 4 books to choose from, and one was Dune, and they chose Dune. So we were reading Dune on my channel.
Links will be in the doobly-doo. So a great series. You guys did a great series on Dune. I just finished watching it last week. A lot of really good things said there. For me, I always kind of had Dune as part of my life even before I read it, because we had these big bookshelves in the house, and I'd always be leafing through the bookshelves. And ever since, as long as I can remember, Dune, Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, and Gone to Emperor Dune were all sitting there. And I knew those covers like the back of my hand before I ever picked them up and opened and started reading them. I think I was probably 11 when I first read Dune, and I'm going to date myself here because I remember reading Dune in class, hiding it behind my math book, like the week the movie dropped in 1984. So I was I was 11 that year. So I was 10 or 11, depending on what time of year it came out. But I remember reading it while waiting for the movie to be dropped in the theaters. So Mitch, how about you?
I first picked it up, oh God, probably 40 years ago, and I it did not register with me at all. I
Oh,
gave it up
Really?
early on, and a number of years later, a buddy of mine had it and went on about how great it was, and the film was coming out shortly, and I should read it. So I gave it another go and finally got through it. And to tell you the plain truth, it didn't really impress me at the time. I thought, it's an okay story and such. Uh, and obviously, I'm more familiar with it because of the films now.
right.
But on this recent reread that I did, it is astounding how much I remember that I had forgotten. it was it was something else. I mean, entire sections that are barely covered in
Same
the
here.
films that are. I mean, they're not important as far as a film presentation goes, but as far as the character development and plot development goes, some of them are significant. So I was kind of like, wow,
Yeah.
I forgot.
Like
Just amazing.
it,
Just amazing.
until we reread the books. Well, until I reread the book a year or two ago when we were doing Dune on what the adaptation, we were covering the different adaptations of it. I had totally forgotten Gurney goes almost to kill Jessica after him and Paul reconnect. That totally, I had forgotten all about that. I had totally forgotten about the dinner party scene, but that's thanks to
Yeah.
David Lynch because he ignores it in the movie, and Denis
Mhm.
Villeneuve ignored it too. And I don't know if that was the right decision, um, but there was a lot of
And
stuff. Good,
Dressing down Holland, that was
yeah,
I mean,
that
that
confrontation.
was intense. That was intense.
And Drunk Duncan. I didn't remember Drunk Duncan, Idaho either. So there was all these things, and I'm like, it's not that it. Well, it had been a long time since I read it. It had been 20 years, but I had read it 6 or 7 times back, or 5 or 6 times back before then. So I thought I knew it, but until I did a reread, I was like, oh, I don't know it as well as I thought I did.
I read it at least once a year, and I have since I was 15. There are certain books that I read every single year. They're sort of comfort reads for me. So I literally read it once a year. So
You got it down
yeah, I don't
pat.
think I forgot much of it. Maybe some minor details here and there, but yeah, this book is seared into my consciousness. So
Is there anything else you read that often
Okay.
other than Wheel of Time?
yeah, the Wheel of Time I'll sort of space out through a year and a half or so, but I'm almost constantly having at least one of those on my Audible. The Dark Tower series as well. So
I
yeah,
think
one of
I've
those is always on my current listening to.
the only other thing I ever did yearly was Lord of the Rings. From the time I was 8 to the time I was 30, I read it at least once a year. And then I saw the movies, and then I stopped reading the books. I don't know
Oh,
why
let me
that
be
is.
clear. I only read Dune the first book once a year.
Right,
I don't go through the entire series
Mm.
once a year. That's insane.
Mm.
Um,
right.
the furthest I've actually read is Chapter House is kind of where I stop.
He stopped with
Um,
Herbert's last book.
yeah, I haven't read any of the new stuff yet, honestly.
They're contentious. I know fans who love them. I know a lot of fans who hate them. I quite enjoy Brian and Kevin J. Anderson stuff, but so what do
I
you?
just have so much on my TBR that I stop. I'm like, I got 18 books I have to read in the next month.
We've sort of touched on it. What are some of your other memories of the first time of when you read through the book through Dune? What do you? What are some things that stand out for you? For me, Paul's worm ride, really stood out.
Mm.
Um, Oddly, the Gam Jabbar scene doesn't stand out nearly as much. Even though I've got two friends who that's as far as they got in the book, two different people I know, they couldn't get past the Gom Jabbar scene. It was just too graphic for them. And I'm like, okay, to each their own. They're missing out. They love the movies, but they just couldn't read the book. And yeah, that's what really stood out to me. That and how creepy the Baron is. But we'll talk about him later. Mitch, how about you?
For me, I thought it was the Water of Life sequences that chilling, to put it nicely, and the degree of detail and inner turmoil that is portrayed is, I think, epic at this point. That stands out. That's one of the things that really stand out for me.
Yeah. How about you, Angela?
I think the Gom Jabbar scene does stand out for me. And the Water of Life, of course, as well. I think between the first and the second reading, I realized that I remember more the characters and how I felt about the characters more so than how I feel about individual scenes. I, for example, still remember that when I read the book first time around, I hated the Bene Gesserit with a vengeance on one level, and on another level, I was thinking, "Oh my God, they're so badass! Oh my God!"
They are.
So yeah, I think for me, characters maybe stand out more so than individual scenes, actually.
Bill?
Yeah, I can agree with that because the thing that stands out to me is the relationship of Paul and Chani absolutely is something that sticks with me, and how different it is between his relationship with the rest of the world as the Mahdi or
Listen,
Lisan al
okay.
Gaib. I mean, they're very different people in those two different circumstances. So those are the things that sort of stick out in my mind because you get to see these intimate moments between him and Chani where he's a completely different person and he's more of the Paul we sort of open the novel with, and later he is not. We
Right.
very much get the feeling that he has uh, become a bit of a monster in a way.
Mm.
That was
So,
something I didn't pick up on when I first read it, when I was young,
oh, I did.
that he
Yeah,
became a
I did.
monster. And for the longest time, I still saw Paul as the hero until I reread the books in like my 20s. And like, oh, he's not a hero. Not really.
No.
The first
No,
time,
but he's still the protagonist,
yeah,
Yeah.
which is interesting, to have that sort of dichotomy going. It's sort of like referring to the Wheel of Time, Darth Rand.
Mm.
We get a character that has gone over the edge, and uh, at this point in Dune, he never comes back, really.
that was a shock to me when I first realized that he's not the hero, he's not the savior. It was just because I remember reading it as a kid and thinking he was the hero. As a matter of fact, he was my favorite character when the first couple times I read the book. Um,
Well, I think the thing is you want him to be the hero, but when you sit back and actually look at the choices he makes and some of the things he does, I mean, I get he has to do them, but at the same time, you're like, man, that's pretty horrible, and that is absolutely going to stain your soul to do some of the things that he has to do, and it does.
so I already touched on who my favorite character was, being Paul in the first when I first read it. Um, who was your favorite character when you first read it, and is that the same person now? I can tell you right now, Paul is not my favorite character at this point. My favorite character in Dune, and probably one of my favorite characters in science fiction and fantasy, is got to be Gurney Halleck. Just there's something really awesome about the troubadour warrior who's also like a Bible quoting, who's always quoting the Bible, so he's got some kind of an education under his belt too, on top of just, being a warrior and a bard, basically. And he's also, this is a spoiler for, I think, children of Dune, he's one of the few off-worlders who is a sand rider. He gets up, he does ride sandworms on his own without anybody else.
Jacurutu, yeah.
Yep, heading to Jacurutu. And I just think that's kind of cool because, that I wish we'd gotten to see his first sand ride, the first time he did it. But I'm hoping we at least get to see it in a movie, see Gurney Halleck on a worm. That would be cool. But how about you, Angela? Who was your favorite character when you first read it? And is that the same now?
When I first read it, I think partly Paul and partly Chani. On partly Paul because I think I didn't like how he at times lets himself being bossed around by his mother, who of course is really pushing in the background. No? She has her own agenda. No? So partly only Chani I found very fascinating insofar as I found the Fremen and their culture in general very fascinating in my first read. Yeah, so those two. Shani is still a little bit of a favorite, but I think I have mellowed much more towards Jessica and would say perhaps Jessica is one of my favorites today after the second read. So yeah.
I've always kind of had a crush on Jessica, at least, well, since my 20s, not when I was a kid reading it, but I just, there's so much to love about Jessica. She is probably one of the coolest women I had read, at that point in my life. There's others that I think are better, but I've always kind of liked Jessica. She's just been really cool. I can understand why somebody would call it bossing her around, bossing him around, but that's a mom with her 15-year-old son. So, but.
Yeah, but I think she has really features of what today we probably would call a tiger mom, no? Very ambitious for her son and wanting that at all costs almost.
Right.
So.
How about you, Mitch?
I remember Stilgar being the quiet strength when I first read it. That kind of exists in the back of my mind. With the reread, though, I am going with Jessica.
Okay.
And I think it's I have a better understanding of things now, and her motivations, her methods are all very interesting. So but in the past it was Stilgar just because of quiet strength. It was always there, and it's something that I admired.
Yeah, I think for me, the first time I read it, it was a struggle between Paul and Stilgar. And it was pretty much always Stilgar. On this recent reread, though, I found myself really wrapped up in Dr. Kynes, and I want more of Dr. Kynes. Just that sort of duality that Dr. Kynes has, the imperial planetologist versus the Fremen side of him, and the way he was able to play both sides to get what he wanted.
Just curious, did everybody read the appendix this time around? Or did you skip the appendix? If you skipped it, that's fine. I skipped it most of the times I've read it too. But did you read the appendix this time around?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I did. I
had forgotten about the appendix, and that it's like all focusing on Dr. the father kind, the first Kynes, Dr. Kynes. Pardo, I think his name was Pardo Kynes.
Oh,
yeah. The one he keeps hearing as he's walking through the desert.
He's dying, yeah.
Yeah.
I know we aren't talking about the film or the films, but I gotta ask, of the 4 Stilgars we've had, who's your favorite Stilgar?
I've only seen the one so far.
Okay.
The early film.
1984.
So it's hard. Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to bow out of this one.
That's fine. This is mostly for the Stilgar stand here.
I'm like, you're gonna make me look up the actor's name
Well,
from
just
the
which
sci-fi
movie?
miniseries.
Which
Sci-fi
sci-fi?
miniseries, Gurney. Stilgar is
The
my
Dune
favorite
one or the
so
Children
far.
of Dune? Because it's two different
Dune.
actors. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
Dune.
that until we got this current one by, oh god, I'm blanking on his name now.
See,
Who's the guy playing
Revenge.
Javier Bardem? Ooh, man, pulled it out. Javier Bardem. Until we got Javier Bardem, I'd say the guy that was in the Dune, Frank Herbert's Children of Dune, the one with the balding, the shorter guy. I'd say he was probably my favorite, but Javier Bardem is just amazing as Stilgar.
Well, yeah.
Stilgar is awesome. I had a hard time not saying calling Stilgar one of my favorite characters, but because he is definitely up there, but he's just not my number one. Um, has this reread changed your perspective on the other characters at all? I know Angela said that
Yeah,
you're looking at
I
Jessica's
think
changed.
so. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think my perspective on Jessica has changed. Um, Also, yeah,
Do you know why
my
it's
perspective,
changed?
um, life experience, I think, is the
Yeah.
main
Right.
main reason. That when I read her first, in my 20s, you're still very close to that age of Paul, and remember very well your own parents bossing you around, and so
Gotcha.
whereas now I look more at her as a woman who, yeah, makes the best out of her circumstances, no? And grabs her opportunities, something I didn't really realize that much when I was reading her the first time around. But I also think other characters, like for example, the Mentats and that whole concept, for
Mm.
example, my view on that has changed as well quite a bit, I think, from the first read to the second read. So yeah, I would say yes. But also certain concepts that the book transports that I might have liked the first time around and would have said, "Oh, this is really cool." Um, I see a little bit more critical now with this distance of, I don't know, 30 years between the two reads now.
That's a long time. I've done a couple of reads. We've done a couple of book series that it's been that long for me.
Earthsea was one for me.
Yeah. Uh,
Mhm.
Hmm.
and so was Wrinkle in Time for me. And speaking of A Wrinkle in Time, Dune is why I was not confused in class when we read A Wrinkle in Time about tesseracts, because the idea of folding space, which is basically what a tesseract in The Wrinkle in
Yes.
Time is it's folding space, and it was a concept that I had actually had put into my head by Dune before I read A Wrinkle in Time, to give you an idea how out of order I was reading stuff as a kid. I was reading stuff that I should not have been reading at 12 years old. Thomas Covenant series by Stephen R. Donaldson, not for kids, and I was Dune, not for kids. Um, what are some things that you had forgotten from your first read that pleasantly or unpleasantly surprised you when you reread it? Bill,
Mm.
you want to think about that? I'll let somebody who wants to go.
Yeah, I'll have to think about that, honestly.
Yeah. Um,
Well, for me, it was Fade.
Yeah,
I hadn't realized quite how devious, or I hadn't remembered how devious he was.
right.
mm.
And so revisiting that character was actually quite a pleasant surprise. Uh, and it's, I mean, it's a great character. It really is. I mean, it's up there with, oh goodness, oh geez, who was the guy in Dickens? Uriah Heep. I mean, he's up there with
Mm.
Uriah Heep as far as creepiness and it goes. And I had forgotten how good that character is.
I'd say Fedroth is probably in my top 100 favorite characters, and that's not characters that I like as people, but characters that I like as characters. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
horrible people are on that list of favorite characters. Just I don't like them because of what they do. Because how dynamic and complex they are as a character. Um, I've always just I'd always you know not really paid attention to the Harkonnens much except for the Baron. And last year, a year or so ago, when we were covering Dune on the other channel, um, I was surprised at how much takes place on Gaidi Prime. I had forgotten that there was
Yeah.
so much there. That there's Phaedroth's birthday celebration and all this other stuff, and that really was like, whoa, what's this? I don't remember any of this. I remembered that Thufir was, captured by was imprisoned by the Baron, but yeah, I didn't remember any of that, and was like totally surprised because Phaedroth is just an interesting character to read, a really interesting character.
Yeah, the same here. I mean, a lot of the Harkonnen stuff I had forgotten as well. I also had forgotten, and I was really surprised about this, the way how this combat scene between Paul and the Jamie, when he has to kill him. Yeah, Jamis.
Yeah.
And I remembered vaguely that he killed somebody, but how exactly and why, I total blank there. No? So yeah, I also had forgotten how big a role the ecology plays in the book itself. So
Yes.
yeah.
It's one of the complaints I've got about the movie, about Dune Part 2, is it takes a big shift away from those themes and instead focuses on the religion and the religious control and and power as themes instead of the ecology and environment of Dune. I don't think anybody watching this most recent movie walked out thinking that spice was oil, although they should, but I just don't think that was made clear enough in these movies. But I don't know. But
For me, I'd have to say the importance of the Fenrings. I kind of
yeah,
forgot how important Count and Lady Fenring really are to the story. I mean, because their whole thing on Getty Prime was, I basically, I didn't forget about it. I knew they were there, but I forgot how important conversations those two have with each other, the Count and Lady, as they're setting up what she wants to do with Fade Ralph. And he's like, and then at the very end, where, this is a man, Paul thinks this is a man who could kill me because the Emperor asked him to kill Paul, and Fenring refuses. I mean, I had forgotten sort of how pivotal they really were within the story.
for Paul's sake, I think it's probably a good thing Fenring refused because
Agreed.
I couldn't begin to hazard who would win between Paul and Fenring. Fenring has the skill and knowledge, but Paul's got the youth and the vigor. That would be an interesting fight, a really interesting fight. All right. Are there any elements of this book? This is where some stuff's going to come up that clash with today's social and or political climate. Things that problematic, didn't age well for you. Can we just say the one word that really stands out? I'm sure everybody would agree, Harkonnen.
Well, yeah, I mean, pretty much everything they do is a little bit off-putting. For, at least I
But
hope so for
but
most society.
yeah, it's
yeah,
just
and it doesn't apply to just now either. I think
Yeah,
that
generally.
off-putting aspect of them goes. I mean, I think it's universal regardless of time.
I'm specifically looking at how Frank Herbert wrote The Baron. And he was trying to make the Baron everything despicable in Herbert's mind. I found out something in the last year that really upset me and kind of put Frank Herbert almost in the Orson Scott Card category. Herbert's a homophobe. He pretty much basically disowned his son, Bruce Calvin Herbert, who was a gay activist. He basically disowned him for being gay, or at least they had a very strained relationship after the son came out. And according to stuff that I've seen that Brian wrote, his dad was very much against his brother being gay. And that's pretty apparent when you see the one gay character also happens to be the most despicable character in every other way. And I don't think that's something an author would get away with writing today. Making the one gay character be everything else that's horrible and rotten with characters in the book.
See, to me, the Baron, without knowing that, the Baron always came across as it wasn't the fact that he was gay; it's the fact that he was a predator.
There's that
not
too.
a gay predator, just a predator. That guy
right.
was a straight up predator. And I mean, I think it could have been written either sex, and it would have came across. This guy is a creepy predator. So that's always what I always took from it. So,
anybody else?
And I don't think this day and age type concept really applies unless someone is actually looking for some sort of gay agenda or anti-gay agenda or whatever. Unless you're actually looking for it, I don't think it would be something that you'd pick up on in the course of the story.
Well, it's not central to the story, but
right.
I think that Glenn has a point that it's the only gay character. And if it was just like a universal character, then why include it? No, I don't know. We might have to ask that question. No, why doesn't author put something into a book? No,
that's a fair point.
So, and it is in the book. So, and for today's standards, the way it is depicted, I don't think that it would stay in the book like that. No, any editor today would say, "Hello, can you cut this out, please?" No, so yeah, but as evil personified, the Baron works exceptionally well, of course. Yeah. No, so.
There's one other thing that I don't think Herbert would have been able to get away with today with an editor, and it's not about the story. It's the style, I think would be the right way to describe it. This is what? Third person omniscient, and that just doesn't happen in science fiction or fantasy anymore. It drives me nuts. I remember when I would read it in a physical book, at one point on one page, you're in Paul's head. 2 lines later, you're in Jessica's head. And then you're in Paul's head again. And it's just like, make up your mind. Make up your mind, Frank. Whose head are you going to be in for this scene? And just because nobody writes that way anymore. And if they do, it's few and far between. And I
see that as a feature, not a bug. I loved it. I loved it reading it as a kid. I loved it because it was sort of free. There was no locked in sort of, this is the one way I'm writing perspective, and that was it. It was very free, and I loved it.
I've gotten too used to the modern.
I thought I had completely, and when you brought up what have we forgotten, that's one of the things that I'd forgotten is it is so open. And, you can learn everything you need to learn at a given time. You don't always have the what is it called? The narrator, just the one point of view.
Right.
And I forgot all about that, and it was so refreshing.
Yeah, I don't mind actually this third person omniscient, but I can understand that today's readers who are really used to the multi POV, so one POV per chapter style of writing, that they might have problems getting into the book. Also, the kind of that the epitaphs basically give us what is in the chapter. No? They're total spoilers in a way. No?
Right.
And
so
see, I don't think of it as spoiling. If anything, at most, I mean, would that be foreshadowing? But
yeah,
I'm also
Yeah.
I'm also not a spoiler phobe. I'm a spoiler file. I've tried coming up with a Latin or Greek-based word to call it, what that would be. I like spoilers. I look for spoilers about movies and shows and books that I haven't watched yet. Like, I remember when the Star Wars prequels were coming out, I was constantly online every day looking for Star Wars rumors and news about what was being done and what was being filmed. That was the kind of thing I'm into. So the way my brain looks at it, I don't see it as spoiling. I think it's no more spoiling than a chapter title. I don't
Yeah,
think.
well, I don't have a problem with it either, but I mean, we really have a culture at the moment, no?
Yeah.
Especially if you're on YouTube, the spoiler phobes are out there, no?
Yeah.
So
we covered a book
yeah.
a few months ago that I jokingly said the title of the book is a spoiler. Because
Darkness of Sephinon.
Yeah, at one point in the
it's
book, they're
Sephinon.
like, they're like, is the evil guys in this city or in Sephinon? Gee, what's the title of the book? I got the answer. They're in Sephinon. It's like, and so I'd love to talk to a spoiler phobe who's read that book and see how much it ruined their experience knowing the title of the book.
There were people claiming when Sanderson released his secret projects that the reviewers please not say the title of the book because that might be a spoiler. No, I mean,
by definition, it's not.
Okay.
It's just
that's out of hand. That's just it's getting out of hand. It's like people reel it in a little bit. We're getting a little crazy with this. If you mention one name out of the book and they're like, oh my God, you spoiled everything for me. It's like, no, I didn't.
So, what are some themes that you notice now and maybe didn't notice before, but if you did, we've touched on some of the themes. Who wants to bring something up?
Be careful what you wish for. This whole creation of the Mahdi and the Bene Gesserit setting that up.
Bene Gesserit?
Okay.
Yeah, like your
Here
slip
you
of the
go.
tongue.
Here's what you wanted. You wanted your Kwisatz Haderach, you get it. You wanted the Mahdi, you got it. And now you don't like it.
Yeah.
Sorry. You helped create this. Sorry. So for me, that's always been a big one is be careful, be careful what you set up. You never know what it's going to sow. What you reap is definitely going to sow something.
Yeah, and how far can we even decide within those parameters? No, who decides what, for example, and how much wiggle room do we then actually have left within that setup of trying to create this Mahdi figure or Messiah figure? No, so yeah.
Herbert had a thing against charismatic leaders. He flat out said it in a number of interviews. That's Paul right there, a charismatic leader, and it's just how dangerous that can be. And like I didn't understand it when I was a kid when I thought Paul was the hero, but Paul's like the secondary villain, or like maybe even the primary villain in the whole story here, because he leads to a lot worse than anything Baron Harkonnen ever did. I think there's more blood on Paul's hands than on Vladimir's hands.
I would agree with you there that, I mean, when I read the book first, I didn't get either that Paul might be much more of the villain or more evil than perhaps the Baron. But I also think it's on that level a very 1960s book, because that's the time when especially in Europe, we kind like more and more find people asking questions about the Holocaust, for example, no? Which also had this very charismatic leader, and attempts to explain how can something like that even happen, and is it preventable? And I think Dune really kind of like rides this wave of a trend that was there in the 60s with those topics.
Okay.
I can understand that. And, history has shown that, a lot of these overly charismatic leaders are not necessarily good for those around them or themselves. I mean, the Jim Jones, certain cult leaders, you look at them, same thing. They started off, they were very charismatic and not necessarily trying to be evil. Things just sort of went that way, but I can see that point. I don't think I was at that point when I first read it with Paul. I was concerned at the end of the book with where Paul was at. 100%. I was concerned. Um, I don't think I saw him quite as a villain yet, but you could see there's a dark path, and he's on it.
And you had just brought up something too. It's the day and age in which the book was written. It's also the beginning of that time where sci-fi started morphing away from the hard science and the silly stories into more characters with a lot more depth, characters whose motivations are somewhat hidden and revealed as the story progresses. So he was on the cusp of that entire transition from the hard science, shallow characters to the deeper characters that we see all the time now.
Yeah.
What I didn't realize also between the first and my second reading of the book is how much Paul actually questions this destiny himself. I mean, in the end, yes, he goes down that path, but before he gets to that point, he has those visions, and he kind of like voices over and over again, this isn't good. I can't do this. I can't go down that path, because that will end in a disaster. And I really had forgotten a lot about that, how much he questions this himself, actually.
Yeah, it's good to see him sort of try and fight that fate off, understanding, okay, this decision leads closer to that path, so I'm not going to do that. It's good to see that internal struggle where we know, Paul's not evil. He's not looking to hurt people, or he would have been like, yeah, let's do that. So that's one of the aspects I love about the book is that he does question, okay, can I do this without becoming, a religious figure?
Paul,
yeah, and particularly when you look at how he begins, he's very unsure about everything. He's gone through a traumatic change. The life that he lived is suddenly completely turned upside down. And early in the book, he's always wondering, about things, how things have changed, and he hasn't even glommed onto the fact that he himself needs to change. He's just so busy trying to deal with the external change that's occurred around him. It's actually, I don't think it's until after the dinner party that he kind of realizes that there's something more going on here than what he envisioned before that point.
Right. I think Paul has got the ultimate case, the scenario of, do the ends justify the means of any character I've seen in literature or fiction, fiction of any kind. I mean, he's literally got the entire future of the human species across the galaxy in his hands, and he's got to decide if saving humanity is worth putting humanity through the jihad, through the holy war, knowing exactly his terrible purpose and knowing how bad everything's going to be, he has to make that decision. And that's not a decision I would make. I would want to have to make, but.
Mm. In a way, Paul has been selected like that, not just selected, he has been bred
Yeah,
like
he's been
that.
bred for it,
No?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Bene Gesserit are on a millennia-long breeding program where they have he's basically genetically engineered in some respects. And when we look at this test he has to do with the Reverend Mother, when I read the book first, the sentence "fear is the mind killer" was one of the coolest sentences ever, no? Whereas now I'm thinking, hold on a second here. Okay, it's good to conquer your fear in certain situations, but what the Bene Gesserits are looking for is basically somebody who doesn't have fear anymore. And a human who doesn't have fear isn't human. No, so Paul is really already right from the start, no, selected in a way. And if you don't have fear, then it doesn't matter how high the stakes are. You might not even notice anymore how high the stakes are, because that element that would correct this for you, that would make you afraid of the stakes, isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
Mm.
Speaking
of
being,
I think that
like
that whole mindset leads into the early question we have in the book of Paul possibly becoming a Mentat, because he is able to sort of switch off and become the human computer and look at the numbers and data and turn off the fear, the anxiety, the any emotion. So yeah, I see your point 100%. That fear is kind of important.
And it's that and the Bene Gesserit training that his mom put him through. So you've got the combination of the two working in concert to embolden him to, go forward. I think that training. I think Herbert made that point fairly early on, and I don't remember him revisiting it later in the book. That the two merged together were going to be a power. I think once he introduced the idea, we were just going to accept it and follow the story with that in mind, because it was never really pointed out again later in the book, I don't believe.
So I've got a question for you guys. This isn't off a schedule, but do you think that there's any basis, or do you think the Bene Gesserit, or as Bill said, the Bene Jesuit, that was a great slip of the tongue, the Bene Gesserit have a point in their testing for whether or not, with the Gom Jabbar test, to see if you're a human or an animal? And do you think that's a valid testing, or do you think they're just liking to cause suffering? And I mean, do you really think that differentiates a human from an animal? The fact, the willingness to remove your hand from the box or chew your trapped hand off. Bill, you don't look like you think that the Bene Gesserit have a point, do you?
No, I mean, because you can't encapsulate what it means to be a human being down to one thing of how much pain can they stand. I mean, I know some lovely human beings who are very low tolerant of pain. It doesn't make them an animal. So you can't distill a human being down to that one aspect. I get the point they're going for, but to use that one very narrow test is a little narrow-minded. It's just, yeah. So I'm sure there's other research they do before they do the test.
Right.
At least that's what I'm hoping.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you. This could only be maybe the final part of the test, with the assumption that up to this point, this person has passed all of the regular order.
Yeah.
And now we're going to submit the final test. And it's not made clear. And this is what I find interesting about the test. the test does not make clear anything other than pain. So while you're feeling the pain, you don't know if the pain is a result of something actually happening to your hand,
Right.
or is it simply an induced pain? Uh, so there's no idea. And I think that's the nature of the test, or what the test is supposed to find out. Do you just at some point, give up because you just can't stand it, because you don't understand that this person actually would not physically harm you?
Right. I do think logic would, for some characters being given the test, the Gom Jabbar test, logic would tell them that no, my hand's not being destroyed. They wouldn't do that just to do a test to see if I'm a person or an animal. I would think, but
In that world, I'm not 100%
I wasn't
convinced.
raised by Bene
Honestly.
Gesserit, so I don't know exactly how wicked the Bene Gesserit really can be. They can do some really cool
Well, they're
stuff.
definitely very manipulative, that's for sure. So
Oh yeah,
we
pulling
have that
strings.
aspect, no? I would say as well, of course it doesn't prove if somebody is human or if somebody is an animal. But what I found also interesting is the whole setup of this test. It reminded me a lot about the Stanley Milgram experiments. No? How willing are participants to kind of like administer electric shocks? No? Little bit different in its setup, no? But I think it gets close to that as well. And that test was also designed not to test obedience, basically. How obedient is somebody? If the person who is in charge of the test says, well, this is the setup and you will have to shock those people, will they do it or will they don't do it? No? Obviously, the Mother Reverend has no qualms in administering this test.
No.
He is cool as a cucumber and doesn't care either way. No?
I think
so. From that point, the Bene Gesserit can be a piece of work.
Oh yeah. No? I think that scene tells us
Yeah.
more about Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mulliam than it does about Paul. A lot more about her than than is revealed about the kid. It's just I have issues with the Bene Gesserit in a lot of ways, but that's that whole religious control theme that Herbert's playing with. Bill's not wrong calling the Bene Gesserit, because they do seem a lot like the more organized part of the Catholic Church, and historically, just in this case, it's all women instead of all men. But as far as I know, the Catholic Church doesn't have a eugenics program. But that aside, it does make me think a lot of them. No offense to anybody who's Catholic. I'm just saying the organization itself has got a lot of organized religion problems.
It's modeled on a religious order, no? It's clearly modeled on a religious order.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was the Inquisition, which was Catholic based. So
yeah,
I mean, in the past, it certainly was there, and obviously in this day and age, I severely doubt there's anything that the Catholic Church is doing along those lines.
Right. I've got the impression that Herbert was kind of hostile to religion.
I think he was hostile to unchecked religion. Absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But
the fundamentalist aspect of it, no, because Paul is called the Mahdi, no, so this is like, I think, a prophet, or also the Messiah, no, so there are religious undertones throughout the book, no, and this idea that there might be a religious motivated leader, no, is of course as problematic as a politically motivated leader.
Yeah, 100%.
Very true. Very true.
So,
An aspect I found really that has stood up quite well when we're talking about the Bene Gesserit is how women are presented in the book. I found this very surprising that it stands up quite well. Jessica is quite a complex character, no? But also, like we have with the Bene Gesserit as well, they're complex as well. We have this all-female, very powerful group, but then they seem to elect to exact this power only by being the figure behind the throne. No, they have all those women that, well, the Harkonnens marry them, the Atreides marry them, or have them as concubines, and their explicit task is to influence the politics. And then, of course, bear their children. And Jessica actually refers to herself at some stage, I'm just a broodmare. No? So, while we have kind of like, well, the great houses and their system, which is very patriarchal, then we have the Fremen on the other side, no? Who seem to have a totally different idea and have a totally different society and structure.
Because I don't think in any of the Dune books I've read, I've seen, well, this time period onward, the time period Frank wrote in, and the prequel stuff, it doesn't fit. But I don't think I've seen a single ruling lady of any house. There's not, not a single house that's ruled by a female character. All the female characters in power are wives or concubines or reverend mothers. Or
basically the Bene Gesserit prop up the system. Huh?
Yeah.
They're not rebelling against that.
They're the sort of engineers of the leaders.
Actually, they're doing what women have done all along. They make us guys think we're in charge.
My wife doesn't even pretend. She knows she's in charge. I know she's in charge. There's no pretense.
Right.
My wife is 100% the boss. I don't even pretend.
Oh, yeah. Agreed there.
So, the last question I've got for everybody at the moment is, would you recommend this book to younger readers today, mature readers, both?
I'd say 15 and up, honestly.
They wouldn't understand.
Well, that's the thing is it's complicated, and I don't think at say 10 or 11 years old you're going to pick up on the themes, which is why you thought Paul was a hero. So yeah, I'd say 15 and up. Absolutely, I would recommend this to everyone. But I love this book, so I recommend this to everyone. If they haven't read it, I'm always like, you have to read Dune, or at least listen to the audiobooks. Those are awesome as well.
A lot of versions of it out there too to listen to.
Yeah, you can find a narrator or the full cast if that's your thing. I mean, it's out there.
And the full cast is abridged. I discovered that the hard way this past week.
I would think with some of the more extreme examples of evil and such, I wouldn't recommend to anyone under 16, maybe even 18, considering what most 18-year-olds are like in this day and age. I think I would I'd reserve recommending it to adults more than anybody else.
Angela?
Yeah, probably as well. I mean, Paul is 15 when we meet him in the book, but I don't know if today's 15-year-olds would be able to really relate to him. I mean, well, it would really depend on the 15-year-old, I would say. But overall, probably adults, and then there is no age limit. Read it, go.
I don't think 15-year-olds today can relate to any character that doesn't have these to play with.
Yeah, probably. 15-year-olds,
they know nothing but phones.
Yeah, but I think they're a little better able to grasp some concepts due to those phones. They're exposed to a lot more a lot earlier than we were at our age because
True.
they have such easy access to everything.
Also, I mean, no matter what age you are, you will just you get out of a book whatever speaks to you, not so I
True.
could see
Yeah.
15-year-olds, yes, there will
Yeah.
be stuff in there that will speak to them, no?
Yeah, and I would
Yeah.
also say that it's not so much they're exposed to more that is of value, it's the quality of what they're exposed to. In this day and age, unfortunately, there's TikTok is what they do. If they go on to, let's say, YouTube, and they're given a subject that they're interested in, and they see something that's a 5-minute video and an hour and 5-minute video, I guarantee you they're going to watch the 5-minute video. Um, there's a social psychologist named Jonathan Haidt, who he's a professor at NYU. He just came out with a book recently called the Anxious Generation, I believe it is. It's just came out. He's been doing all of the news things. I've been following this guy for years. He is very, very critical of kids and phones and what it's doing to society. He's actually rather concerned about what kids are capable of understanding at this point in time, and not only understanding, but how mature that they are. When, at 18, I was stupid, granted, but I was somewhat mature. You're not seeing that for most kids nowadays.
Anybody else have anything else that they wanted to bring up? Any points or notes that they had? Stuff they wanted to talk about on this book?
I just really want to thank our guests for coming on and talking with us about this
Thank you,
um,
guys.
series I love, particularly this book. And it's great seeing other people's point of views. Angela, I absolutely have to look at some of the things that I thought about the books just from some of your observations. I'm like, huh, I never looked at it that way. Now I want to reread it and sort of take that in mind. So thank you for that. Mitch as well brought up some great points. So thank you both so much for joining us. We really
It's
appreciate
been a
it.
blast.
Thank you.
Thank you guys at home for watching. Please come back in 3 weeks as Bill and I are joined again by Mitch. We'll be discussing a classic Charles Dickens, The Tale of Two Cities. It's going to be interesting. I haven't read that since 7th grade, and I only remember the beginning and the end, not anything in between. So I'm looking forward to this read. I don't think I've read any other Dickens. I don't even think I've read A Christmas Carol in school. So I think this is the only Dickens I've ever read.
Ooh, shame
So
on you.
yeah,
No twist.
I do have to fix it. Oliver Twist is one of the books that's high up on my TBR. I've seen film version of it, but never read it. Thank you again for watching. Please come back in 3 weeks and leave us a comment or two. And hey, don't forget to be awesome.
See ya.
Thank you.